rolling. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time, sir. I appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's been, as we were talking about a little bit before, it's been a little while. I played a little football back in high school with one of your sons, and, he was blocking in the trenches, and I was the slow guy that couldn't beat a snail, but at least had good hands. So I think it was a good thing I stuck to skiing rather than football.
That's right. You had other skills. You were good to go.
So one of the things that was just I always admired from a distance, when you're kind of a little bit younger and going in through high school and those things, and you see this, NBA All-Stars, got his jersey retired, and just still leader in blocks and all these things, was just so intimidating. And you're such a nice guy. You're such a great person. And still, when you're kind of that younger age, though, you're like, oh, I don't want to go over and talk to him. Right. And one of the things I always admired from a distance was just the fact that you were always so great defensively. And the NBA, 5-time NBA all defensive team, blocks, all that. And then the one thing I always at least learned from my dad and playing basketball and everything else is that defense is so much about heart and drive and want to, and that kind of attitude to put in the extra effort. And so kind of speaking of that, I'm just curious, where does that drive to kind of give it your all and your heart, where does that kind of come from for you?
Well, I think for my personal story, it dates back to the coach who taught me how to play basketball when I was 21. I was working as an auto mechanic in a tire store in Southern California, and this junior college coach convinced me to give basketball another try. And so after going back to junior college and working with him, and then the head coach who'd been one of Coach Wooden's first All-American players at UCLA, they kind of distilled in me this importance of playing the whole game. It wasn't just about scoring, but it was really about, you had to get the ball first to be able to go and do anything with it. And so we were a very defensively oriented team. And then I just kind of naturally found myself blocking shots and kind of clogging up the middle. So it was something I always appreciated, and it was something I could do. And then as time went on and I moved on to UCLA, and I just found that was something I really needed to focus on. And so as time went on, it became a bigger and bigger part of my career and a bigger part of who I was as a player. It really defined me. And that's the whole thing about sports is, right, you want to find that one thing you're really good at. Sure. You can be a great skier, or you could be a great mogul skier, right? And so let's drill down and really focus deeply in doing this one thing really, really well, because that's going to propel you the furthest. And so I learned to do that. And when I came to the NBA, I wasn't the greatest scorer, wasn't the fastest runner or anything, but I could do one thing really, really well, and it was help our team win games by playing defense.
Mm-hmm. Now, kind of going back a little bit, 21 is such a late age to kind of really be getting into basketball. Now, you were a car mechanic, right?
Yeah, I was. I didn't play much in high school, and I just made the decision that basketball and sports weren't for me. And I went to trade school, and I learned to be an auto mechanic. And I just got a job in Southern California where I lived in a tire store doing all kinds of mechanical kinds of things. And had kind of given it up. And this junior college coach had a background of working with big guys, which is a pretty rare thing. Mm-hmm. I find even today. And he was willing to teach me those things and be with me every day and run with me in the mornings and work out with me in the evenings. And I think more than half of the decision to do it was the commitment he made to me as a coach, to really be there for me and show me how to do it. Never wanted anything from me other than a ticket to a Laker game here or there. Became a lifelong friend. He just passed this summer. We had a 40-year friendship. That to me was just the biggest reason why I tried it and tried to do it, because he believed in me. And it wasn't easy. I had ups and downs and had to learn how to be an athlete and how to be a good athlete. And then, as you experienced in skiing, as you move up in the levels, it gets a little tougher. It's a little harder. You have to push a little deeper, and you've got to find things out about yourself that you didn't know previously, but his commitment to always being there and being able to call him at 10 o'clock at night after a game and saying, geez, I can't buy a rebound today. Like, what's going on? That was a difference for me.
So did he really kind of help instill like that belief, like when earlier on through high school and stuff like that, you're kind of tinkering and is that just a little bit of like difference? Like you liked it, you kind of dabbled, and then you have this person kind of come around the mechanic shop like, hey, like you have some potential, you can really.
Yeah, in high school, as we all experience, I mean, sometimes you'll have one good coach at the high school in one particular sport, but usually it's the English teacher who wants to make an extra couple grand for the winter.
Right.
And so you don't get the best coaches always, and that was the experience I had in high school. The coaches really didn't know what to do with me. I didn't know what to do with me. I was growing fast. I was uncoordinated, and so there just wasn't anything there. And when I met Coach Tom later on, when I was 21, he seemed to know what to do with me. He's like, I can teach you how to play basketball as a big man, at 7 feet tall. Mm-hmm. And specific things that you don't know about the game of basketball. And I, in my own mind, had this idea of what basketball was about. And the first time he took me out on the court for half an hour, he blew all those things out of the water. He showed me stuff I'd never heard of, never seen before, and really opened my eyes to maybe that I could do this. And,
right.
And it was a big ask to consider doing that again, because I'd been, just working on cars and partying with my friends on the weekends. So it was a big adjustment. But I just, he saw something in me, and he sparked an interest in me where I said, all right, I'll give this a try for a little while and see where it goes.
Mm-hmm. And that commitment, so deciding to go to UCLA, I mean, obviously growing up, John Wooden, I mean, if you're a coach out there, you kind of have to read John Wooden's books. They're some of the best that there are. They Call Me Coach is one of my favorites. And so going through, you transferred there, but was that always, was Coach Tom was he at UCLA, or how did that transition work?
No, he stayed at the junior college,
okay.
But we were in contact all the time. And actually that ended up not being the best move. I think there were other schools I could have gone to and received more playing time. UCLA had just come off going to the national championship game against Louisville in 1980 and lost. But they were number 2 in the country in the polls at the beginning of the year. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, wow, how can I turn down an opportunity to go play at a school that I've grown up around and been through that whole era, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
But I ended up not playing much. I ended up sitting on the bench, and it was really a frustrating couple of years. But it was my coach, Tom, who kept saying, hey, this isn't about this year, next year. Like the things we're working on and things we're building are to have an opportunity to play professionally, whether it's in the NBA or in Europe or wherever it might be. And so he said, you got to keep working. And there were days I wanted to quit and things, I was just frustrated beyond belief at many moments during those 2 years. But he just kept saying, keep working, go to the weight room early, go out on the track, do the extra things, because I'm telling you, you will have an opportunity to try out at the next level down the road. And for some reason I believed him, and I kept doing it. And I was, the first guy to practice, last one to leave, did the running, did the shooting, hit the weight room, did all the extra things you needed to do. And, sure enough, later on, when I did have an opportunity to try out for the NBA, the Utah Jazz were at least, they were interested and said, you're kind of rough, but we'll give you a go. We can tell you've been working, and gave me a chance to play for the Jazz.
It was funny as you were talking there, you're talking about all the things you need to do, being the first one to be in the basketball court, last one to leave when you're practicing and things like that. Like it seems like that's just second nature to your kind of personality. But I would say most of those people, especially in this day and age, they want immediate results. So the day in, day out kind of grind of having to go through.
It is a grind, and it's not easy. And no, that doesn't come naturally to me. I hated going to practice some days. I hated running. And that was my job for the better part of 16 years was to run. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't always my favorite thing, but I loved the competition, and I loved pushing myself, and I loved seeing what could be done. And being out on the court when the team's playing well and all the cylinders are firing, or, probably the same as hitting that line on the moguls course where it's just all comes together, is an unbelievable experience. And so I just kept going because I just said, I'm just going to keep doing this until the doors are all shut. And, I could have been 3 months after I started, but it turned out to be, between college and the NBA, pretty close to 16 years of basketball. And that was a lot of fun, and what an amazing experience, and beyond anything I'd ever imagined, especially when I was back there, in fixing carburetors in Buena Park, California.
No, it's an unbelievable journey. And one of the things that so when you're going through and you're thinking about UCLA, because you did get the opportunity, the Phoenix Suns drafted you, right?
Yeah, they did. It was it was an unusual rule back there where if your class had graduated, whether or not you were in school, you were eligible for the draft. And teams sometimes would take a flyer on guys and say, well, we're just going to tie them up for a year. You could keep a player's rights for, up until the next draft. And but at that time, it was what they offered me, what was called a make good contract, meaning that you had to be on the team beyond the 1st of January to be guaranteed you get the full salary, which at that time was $30,000. And, and if you got cut anywhere prior to that, you only got a pro rata share, and you gave up your eligibility as an amateur. And so, it was a wake up call that, wow, people were interested in me, and it forced me to, I kind of doubled down on what I was doing. And at the same time, it wasn't really a realistic opportunity because I didn't want to give up 2 years of college or at that time, 3 years of college to go and try that, hoping that maybe I'd make the team.
Yeah.
So that's why I stuck around. But it was, but then, and I can't remember what was the rest of your question.
Oh, it's just the fact of just that transition to the pros, because I know that you said, you wanted to make, if you were good enough to kind of make that jump. So the fact that, that answers that of like, all right. And it sounds like Coach Dom was definitely influential in like, hey, we need to get a little bit better, and you still got to keep working on your craft. Because, you said when the Jazz drafted you, you're still a little rough around the edges, and 4th round, they kind of take their own flyer on you. And
well, they did, and they surrounded me with coaches as well. There were 2 coaches here then: Phil Johnson, who was a great NBA coach, and Jerry Sloan's assistant for decades, and then and Frank Layden, who was the head coach, and his son Scott Layden, who was just starting out in the coaching business, currently the general manager of the Timberwolves. Okay. They put a little plan together, and they said, look, we want you to come about 6 weeks early to training camp before anybody else gets there. And so they put me in this intensive weight training program, an intensive running program, and Phil Johnson worked with me with all these drills out of the basketball court, and then they kicked my butt. And I suddenly realized how much, how much more condition I needed to be in to compete at the NBA level. And then when the season started and we started playing games, and I saw how big, I was a big guy, but how big and strong all the other players were, especially at the center position, I was like, okay, now I really got to get serious about this, because these guys are so good, and I don't want to be pushed around out there. I want to be the pusher and not the pushy.
Right.
And so I doubled down on the squats and the cleans and everything else to get as strong as I could so that I could hold my own out there. And that really kept me going even later in my career, because, again, I wasn't the fastest or, the best shooter, but I could hold my own. And when you came in the paint and you tangled with me, you're going to remember me the next day. And so that became sort of my calling card. And then it just became sort of self-energizing from that point forward. It's like, well, I had some success. I'm going to do more of this and have more success. And I just kept working every off season. I'm like, all right, I'm going to try and be a little bit better at this or that or the other thing for the next year. And that's really what kept me going, because there were times when they could have traded me. There was other players they could have picked up that, probably had better scoring ability or whatever, but they knew that I helped the team win. And I think that's what kept me around.
Mm-hmm. Well, it also helped kind of breeding that confidence and success. It's almost a little bit of a snowball effect, right? You just start to get a little bit of work going in the right direction. And then, you know, as that confidence grows, it's amazing what can happen when you get
It
that
is.
confidence.
And it rubs off. People see it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's apparent to coaches and to fans, and they're like, wow, you know, this guy is really making it happen. And so then they double down on their, you know, their attention to you and their effort to you to give you more than you want. You know, the worst thing that can happen in sports is the coach stops talking to you, right? And you know you're on your way out.
You're in trouble.
So I always stayed very close to the coaches, and they became great friends as well over time, and continued well after my playing career was over. Because I wanted to know what they were thinking, and you know, the fans and things that went on in the sports pages or sports radio, whatever it was, were disconcerting at times. And it was always the coaches who brought me back to ground zero and said, "Don't listen to that stuff. What you do helps our team win, and you just need to focus on that."
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also one of those things that I feel like once you're close with the coaches, I feel like it kind of helps your learning process as well. Like whether you're going through practice and you're kind of watching film, and maybe it's not even film of you, it's film of other parts of the team. So you get a better understanding of the game. And I mean, I know it in my ski career, when we'd be up on the hill doing drills, it wasn't like once I did my section, I was done. I was talking with the coaches, watching the other athletes come down and be like, okay, I see what he's talking about there when he's talking to him. And I feel like that kind of helps your process and just become, you know, a better athlete or a better, you know, in general.
Yeah, it does. And I think so much of the learning occurs off the hill or off the court. You know, my favorite memories were going out and having a beer after the game with the coaches just in the hotel bar at night, you know, and just talking about the game, talking about life and telling stories. And I learned so much about the game of, you know, the sport of professional basketball, and what was required and what other coaches do, and we talk about other players, and same thing, whether you looked at film or, you know, watched something that occurred during the game that night. Just that was the real education, I think, for me, that went way beyond what we did on the court.
Mm-hmm. Now, going into those off season, you know, you're talking about the lifting and kind of all that maintenance, especially as a big man, you know, being able to take the beatings, and it was a much different game back then, a lot more physical and everything else compared to now. I mean, what would you do when you would go in and build a game plan? Would it be with the coaches? And when you would go in and do that, would you come up with just like a checklist, a daily checklist of, all right, today I need to shoot X amount of shots at the free throw line, or how would that kind of break down for you?
Yeah, it did. It changed over the years, but initially, you know, you'd meet with the coaches the last day of the season or after the last, you know, playoff loss, whatever it is, and they'd give you some ideas about what they'd like to see in improving your game, you know, before the next training camp. So that would get you started. But over time, I knew what I did on the court. I knew the value I had. You know, they could still keep you or trade you or whatever they wanted to do, but I knew that I had a certain skill set that I was pretty good at, and I knew what I needed to do to stay in condition for that. So I'd start out just taking a couple weeks off, and then I'd be back on. You know, I got into mountain biking way early when it first started, and living in Park City, obviously that was something easy to do, and it was much easier on my knees than trying to run and jog all summer long.
Yeah.
So I'd start doing that. I'd be back in the weight room with these guys that had this kind of football training program. And so I was doing some pretty heavy duty weightlifting. And then over the course of the summer, you'd start working more, get back in the gym and get back on working on basketball skills. And I'd meet the coaches again, like Phil Johnson, and he'd run me through like an hour process of dribbling drills and passing drills. And he would say, he says, you know, it's not like we need you to dribble the ball, but we need you to have the confidence to dribble the ball, because it's going to help the rest of your game, the rest of your balance. And so I did a lot of that stuff. And then they'd say, okay, now we do little drills like 6 layups end to end in 30 seconds. And, you know, or we did a drill where I'd get the ball at the free throw line with my back to the basket, and I take one big drop step to the left or to the right and go up and jam it, you know, in one step. And things that would just stretch you a little bit more. And so that's the kind of stuff I did during the course of the summer. And then as we got closer to training camp, then I'd really start ramping it up. I'd push myself harder on the mountain bike, and then in September, I'd go back out on the track and start doing, the sprint, the straightaways, walk the curves, sprint the straightaways, walk the curves, that kind of stuff, to really make sure that I was in condition for the beginning of training camp, because it wasn't like you went to training camp to get in shape. You better be in shape by the time you get there, because there's so many other things that they're working on. They've got to try and integrate in a short period of time. They're looking at personnel, who we're going to keep, who we're going to get rid of. And I found that if I was in great shape, they just didn't worry about you as much. And I didn't want them talking about me a whole lot during training camp, because when I do my job and keep my head down, even though it's pretty hard to do at 7'4". But, but being in great shape going in gave me a little edge. And when John Stockton and Karl Malone came around a couple of years later, they really embodied that, and it became a cultural thing for the team. And maybe you've seen that in skiing as well. But once they became so focused on being in top condition coming into the beginning of the season, the coaches didn't have to mention it to anyone else, because the other players saw it. They're like, geez, I came in, I thought I was just going to get in shape here. And man, John Stockton and Karl Malone are kicking my butt. And so the next year, for sure, those guys, got a little busier during the summertime and came back and just as good a condition as those guys.
I mean, how much of an advantage do you feel like that kind of gave you throughout the season? I mean, I feel like so much of that's not only the physical, but you also get that mental edge of like, all right, because essentially back then, it was such a different time period towards sports in general. It's definitely not as, while it was serious, right? I mean, everyone dedicated their time and everything else. I mean, now, especially younger kids, you're a basketball player at 6 years old and you're going to basketball camp and you're in, right, and that is your specialty and that's what you're doing.
Yeah, it's different now than it was back then, but I think being in great condition gave me some confidence that especially after you go through a couple 3 seasons and you understand what it really takes to be consistent. Mm-hmm. Because as you well know, it's great if you have a one great run this month, but what are you going to do next week, right? Yeah. And you can't have a drop off. You've got to build that consistency, and the consistency comes primarily from conditioning, being able to take the beating, take the pounding, and come back the next night and do it again. I mean, sometimes we play 5 games in 7 nights in 5 different cities, and so it's great what happened on Monday, but it's now Friday and we're 4 cities later, and you better get it together. And so learning how to do that, I think through the conditioning process really helped give me an edge, where the coaches knew they could count on me to give a great effort. And some days the shots didn't go, and some days you didn't run as fast or whatever, you're tired, or the other things that played into being on the road. But they knew they had a good foundation to work with to at least start the game. And I always wanted to be one of those starting 5 guys that they knew they could count on.
Yeah, being able to be counted on is definitely a good feeling. What was that travel like back then? Because I mean, you see a little bit in like The Last Dance, right? And that's even a little bit further ahead. That documentary over the summer with Jordan was so enlightening. But I mean, it's just one of those things that you don't realize in today's game, right? Because everyone's flying private or everything. I mean, what was that, especially for someone that's 7'4"? What was that day in, day out on the road grind? I mean, that had to be just
well, it was rough, because if you played today in Salt Lake City and tomorrow you're playing in San Antonio, you had to take the first available flight because they needed backups in case there was a problem with one of the planes. So you were at the airport at 5:30, 6:30 in the morning, catching the 7 a.m. to Dallas to change planes to go to San Antonio. And, we flew all commercial, and then you're sitting in baggage claim, and you got, 20 people, 25 people that are traveling. And so they got 2 buses, and you got to wait to get all the bags. We probably got 60, 70 bags, something like that, get all that loaded in. So we're just sitting in baggage claim in those hard plastic chairs. And it was rough on you. And then, like, what do I eat? So I got to play tonight. And so, back then it's like chili dogs or whatever you could find in the airport or at the hotel, grab a quick sandwich, take a quick nap, and go play. So it was challenging physically to do that. And I think, once the team started doing the charter airplanes, which I think Pistons were the first team to do that with the Bad Boys. That became all of a sudden a big deal. I think the Jazz were the last team to do it. I think I could have played another year or two if we'd had that, because it was just so hard on your body to get done with the game. Then you got to go find something to eat at 11 o'clock at night. You don't fall asleep till 2 or 3 in the morning because you're wound up from the game. You're up at 6. You know, you're back at the airport, and you know, just doing that day after day after day after day, it was just is pretty hard on your body, much less being 7'4" trying to do it.
I mean, that's just a crazy grind to especially think about now. I mean, where it is, that's unbelievable to kind of just go through, just flying on the plane, commercial, waiting around. And then, I mean, it's crazy just to think about how much, you know, the nutrition's even changed in like the last 4 or 5 years, like from when I was competing and everything else. Now it's like this whole thing, you know, we would be like, all right, let's stop at the nearest fast food place. We're in a rush. We got to get to the next spot. So we're in our 10-hour drive to Canada. Okay, we're stopping here. This is the spot. And
that's right. It's Popeye's chicken today, baby. Go win a gold medal.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's just how it is. And, you know, and there's just some days you just have to deal with that. And we all paid attention to our nutrition. We tried to do things, but back then it was the beginning of carbo loading and eat to win and that kind of stuff. And then, you know, and then it kind of moved into the zone diet and other things. And then there was Michael Jordan, who just had a, you know, 20-ounce T-bone steak at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Good. I look back at that now, I'm like, geez, you know, I probably should have eaten more steak. But you just, you know, you just deal with it. And that's part of that, is that summer conditioning again, of at least giving yourself a chance to get through the season, because you know there's going to be days like that. And there's days you're just, you know, grabbing whatever you can find to eat, and you got to go play, because that's just what the schedule is. You just can't do anything about it. But makes for good stories.
Yeah, definitely. So going through and be traveling on the road, kind of being tired, going through all that routine, like what helped you kind of stay focused on the priorities that you needed to take care of, like game day? Once it was into game mode, did you kind of have a routine before the game and kind of look through like some notes or something like that?
Yeah, I did. I took some sports psychology classes when I was at UCLA, and then my coach, Tom, the junior college coach, had given me some stuff to think about. And so I just walked around the painted area under the basket, and I would just tell myself, I'm the biggest, baddest, you know what, out on the court tonight. Even though I was playing against Olajuwon or Patrick Ewing or David Robinson or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, whoever it was, I knew on that given day that they were going to have to mess with me. And so that's how I kind of psyched myself up. And I'd spend some time in the afternoons just kind of visualizing great plays and seeing the ball go through the net and things like that you learn in sports psychology. And just to be centered in who you are on the basketball court, but also being very aware of what's going on around you, that kind of existential visualization stuff they teach you. Sure. So I did a lot of that kind of stuff. I don't know if it helped or not all the time, but some days you play great, some days you don't. But I tried to at least have good mental focus about that, and at least come to the game with that intention of that's how I tried to set myself to succeed on that particular night. So yeah, it was it's mental practice, just like you practice physically and get yourself in shape. It's just part of being an athlete.
Now, did you have, I mean, say there's a night when you know you're going up against Olajuwon or David Robinson or something like, would you be more concerned about yourself, or would the opponent also be like, okay, I know I'm going up, I got to make sure my level's raised while you're doing your self-talk, they got to deal with me. But also in the back of your head, are you thinking a little bit like, okay, going up against Olajuwon, like he better be ready for what I'm bringing, and would that kind of would that be in some of the thought process?
Yeah, we would talk about strategies in the shoot around that day or the practice the day before, about how to best play those guys, what their tendencies are. I mean, even back then we had statistics of, percentages of when they go right, they score this much. When they go left, they score, when they go left, they only score 17% of the time. When they go right, they score 42% of the time. Little things like that, that you learn. And so you had to work that into the game plan of like, all right, every time he gets the ball, I'm going to force him this direction. I'm counting on my teammate to come over and help. You'd spend some time focused on that. but and there's also times when it's just you one-on-one. If you get, when it gets down to crunch time, sometimes it's difficult for teammates to give you help defensively. And so sometimes the coach is like, I'd love to help you, but I can't leave that guy, Robert Ory, out there in the corner to shoot 3-pointers all day. And so, you got Olajuwon on your own tonight, big guy. And,
Yeah.
and so you just did what you could. And, over time you learn little things that would bug other players, little idiosyncrasies they had, or try and push them another 2 feet further out on the floor. So they're a little more uncomfortable. They weren't in their sweet spot, things like that you try to do just to mess with them.
Right.
And a lot of times you could get under their skin, and they'd get mad about being pushed around during first half of the game. The second half, they'd get a little hot and bothered about it, and maybe throw an elbow or something. And then you're like, okay, I broke his concentration. So that was the objective.
That's a win. I mean, how different is it watching like the NBA now compared to back when you played? I mean, how do you feel about the fact that there's so much like less contact? I mean, you got Harden going into the paint, and I mean, it's just a different type of game now, right?
Well, I mean, you always have to remember the NBA is about entertainment first and foremost. And so fans always want to see more scoring. They want to see more slam dunks. And I think they miss a lot of the nuances of the game because of that. I like the contact. I like the fact, I mean, I like being able to touch guys a little bit. And I think in the playoffs, we've seen that they let a little bit more of it go. They don't want fights, obviously, and stuff like that, but we actually kind of loved fights and things like that back when I played. So it's just a different game now, and people grow up differently. I mean, we grew up playing street ball and playing in, the gyms in downtown LA, and now, and then not too far after that, the AAU thing got going, and kids grow up doing that. And it's just a whole different experience. So they have a different, relationship to that aspect of the game, of the pushing and the shoving. And we didn't have a lot of friends on other teams where they all grew up playing, AAU, high school, traveling teams, all that stuff with each other. And so I guess they look at it a little bit differently than we did.
Right. No, it's a totally different world when it comes to that. I mean, me growing up, I remember, obviously you guys, the Bulls, the Pit, it was one of those things, and that was fun to watch, because that physicality, you could see. I'm thinking of just the Last Dance with Jordan going up against the Knicks that one series, right? Where those are, it's a foul, it's hard fouls, but it brings out that extra competitiveness, right? It brings out that extra, you get to see that greatness come out of Jordan. It's just, it's an interesting aspect watching the game now, where it's like, you can't even start to get into that. And then Harden's fat, they blow the whistle hard, and he's going on the free throw line, and he's got a great game the way he plays, and free throw shooter, but I feel like it makes it just a little bit less entertaining and bring them to the line so much.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the tendency is they get create too much distance between players, and guys shoot too freely. And there's times, I was watching the Jazz during this playoff run, and when they would just have a complete defensive breakdown, and a lot of it is because of that kind of cultural thing that they kind of revert back to, even subconsciously, where they're not up in guys' faces and really pushing them and body checking them and all the rest of the stuff that you need to do to play great defense. And sometimes I have to get up and walk out of the room for a minute.
That'll happen sometimes. That'll happen. It's definitely an interesting times down there in the bubble, but it's been entertaining. Playoffs have been entertaining for sure.
Yeah.
So back to you. One thing I always was kind of curious about. Coming in late into your athletic career, 21, getting into it more, and the 16 years. Just a little bit about the perseverance that you kind of have to go through, because there are so many days where things are clicking, everything is working well, but there's a lot of times, especially in this day and age, no one really wants to talk about the nitty gritty of when things are not working well. You're failing, you're losing, things are not clicking.
Yeah, I think that perseverance doesn't get the accolades I think it deserves, because it's not, you got to have some talent. There's no question about that. But that seems to be the people that persevere the most are the ones that, end up on top at the end. And it's that extra time of learning how to do, oh, sorry, my phone's ringing.
No worries.
Get rid of that. I just think that um, there's, you can get a lot of things done if you just persevere. And even in business, you see people that just kind of grind it out. Like they have a good plan. They don't seem to be getting anywhere, but they just kind of stay at it and stay at it and stay at it. And if you're smart about what you're doing, eventually you'll find a break. You know, something will pop up or something will shift because you did that. And so I pay attention to that a lot, especially we've gone through this whole COVID thing. We've had a lot of us had to reinvent ourselves. It's like, all right, what assets do I have? What can I leverage in a different way? And how do I go about it? And once you decide that, then it's that just plugging away at it every day, every day, every day. Okay, what are the 3 things I'm going to do today that are going to move my business forward that I'm going to get done whether I want to or not, even if it's at 10 o'clock at night. And that's from a little book from a friend of mine named Mark LeBlanc. And but it's that consistent effort, even if it's just 1 action step or 2 action steps that you get done that day, that can make the difference because it just builds over time. It gets better, better, better. And by the end of the month, you've got 30 things done. And that to me, just nothing happens quick. Everybody wants the quick fix, the quick turnaround. It doesn't work that way. But if you're willing to hang in there and keep focused and keep working day after day after day, well, you know, you'll amaze yourself at what will pop loose because you put in that effort.
Right. And for you, was it looking at things, breaking it down like monthly, or would it be like, okay, these are the goals for just today, or would you break it down weekly, monthly? How would you go through?
Are we talking about athletics or business?
Let's go business. We've been talking about athletics. Let's go with business world a little after athletics.
Yeah, I think from the business standpoint, you do have to have some goals of what you like to see. You have to paint a picture of, you know, like the old Stephen Covey thing, begin with the end in mind, right?
Right.
But then, you have to break it down into little tasks, little small tasks. And then you have to prioritize those tasks based on what's going to move yourself further the fastest. And, you know, when you're first starting out, it's really hard because you're still trying to conceptualize what you're doing and where you're going. But as you start to get just a little bit of traction, it becomes so much clearer about the things you need to focus on and the things that you need to delegate or not do. Because, and we, I think, delude ourselves sometimes into thinking we got to be doing all these other things when the reality is you need to get on the phone with the person that can write the check that hired you or get the next contract, more so than you need to work on your website or make sure your Twitter's up to date. And you know, those things are just become rabbit holes that you go down to, and you wonder at the end of the week, like, why didn't I get anything done? Why aren't I further ahead? And so a very wise person once told me, you know, the mantra needs to be, what's the shortest distance between me and a check? And that's what you use your filter for your activities. And it works.
And it works. I'm making sure I write that down. So it's kind of speaking to that. I mean, obviously that's some advice for other people to kind of approach either their businesses or in their lives. What else would you kind of offer to them? I mean, obviously you have your book, which I have ordered. I got it ordered up on Amazon. Should be here tomorrow. So I very much look forward to reading it. I've heard nothing but good things. So.
You know, I think in general during this time right now, it's number one, kind of trying to stay centered and not get too wound up in all of the noise that's out there in the space, whether it's, you know, whatever's going on. There's just every day, it's hard to know what to believe, what to read. And, and so that can be very draining energetically. And so I try and stay in a place of I know who I am, I know where I'm going, I know what I'm doing. And yeah, okay, I'm not making the sales right now like I was a few months ago, but I still have a lot to offer. And so I think reframing that of looking at what your assets are and how you can maybe double down on them. You don't always have to go and learn something new. It's about repositioning who you already are, what you already do, what you already bring to the table. And that's something we don't generally look at. You know, it's easy for us to see it in other people, and we tell them about it. But when it comes back to looking at yourself and what you bring to the party and what your greatest strengths and traits are, that's something that's, I think, vitally important, especially right now, because those are the values and the characteristics that are going to stand the test of time. And we've seen that throughout history. So I think that's my best advice right now is to, turn down the noise a little bit and spend a little more time with yourself about and thinking about what bubbles up for you, what your intuition telling you about what you need to be doing next, and start paying attention to that, because otherwise you'll just find yourself lost in Twitter all day long.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it's a scary place.
I have not been on, which is good. I try to steer clear. That was a
Good
documentary actually my wife watched. So she's trying to do 10 minutes a day of social media. She's totally got it down. So it's been pretty good. It allows a lot more time for you to get things done. For sure. It's definitely, but I really like the repositioning and kind of, focusing on what you do well. Because I feel like a lot in this day and age is they always try to focus on the bad things, right? Where you need your work, where you need to work on, but especially kind of in this space.
Yeah, we have this tendency to think about our weaknesses all the time.
Right, for sure.
And if you've had any kind of career in business or had a few jobs, whatever it is, you've learned things. And those things that you've learned are the things you need to go back to and say, how can I take this little bowl of assets and put it out somewhere else or put it in a different direction. And it's not always easy to do, because they're like, I don't know what I do well. Well, go and ask 3 people,
Right. Yeah.
Ask your spouse, ask your boss, ask your coworker, ask the customer, because those are the things that you're known for and that you can leverage going forward. And so that's my go-to advice.
Now, what was that transition like? Because I know for a lot of athletes and people, when they're kind of making that transition after their career's over into the business world, into that next step, it's a lot easier said than done. For a lot of people, it's like my identity's kind of taken away for at least a little while. They go through these kind of really hard periods. And fortunately, I knew I loved coaching, so that I was able to transition fairly easily with school and things of that nature, which was kind of nice. I didn't really have much of a break to really stop and think like, oh God, what do I do now with my life? But I know that happens for lots of different people. And did you have any difficulty with that transition?
Oh yeah, because when you retire from sports, in particular, you go from being really focused on one thing all the time. Like for 16 years, I played basketball. It's all I did. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, here's the menu now and good luck. And you open it up and it's like, where do I start? So yeah, it's a real, and then the issue is that you're always known as an athlete, like, oh, you're that mogul skier, or you're that downhiller, what are you doing now? But they always see you as that athlete. So how can you take that and put it in a different box is really a big challenge. In terms of advice, yes, you are some of those dark periods, but I think in the process of going through those kind of darker days, you learn more about yourself. You learn what you can do, and if you get out and network enough and talk to other people, you'll find what other people appreciate about you, and be able to use that as a calling card to create whatever it is you want to do next. And it's definitely not easy. And I spent a lot of days, years trying to start the speaking business without any idea of what I was doing. I had some friends that did it. A couple of friends I went to UCLA with who were Olympians that were successful doing it. Some people in Salt Lake that I talked to. But you actually sitting down and writing your own story and coming up with your own points, eventually I figured out that I needed to find a coach, and that's what I did. Because again, being athletes, like we're usually pretty coachable. And if you can find somebody who's really, and we're also pretty good at discerning like who's real and who's not, right?
Right. Yeah.
People that talk a big game versus people that actually do it. And so I found somebody that actually could do it, and that helped me a lot. But even with that, once I got it put together, then there was a whole other learning process. It was kind of like starting out in basketball 101 again, when it was speaking 101. Like, what's the message? Why do people hire speakers? Why do they bring them in? What do they want to hear? What kind of message you have to put together? How do you take your stories of who you are and what you've learned and put them in a way that a business audience is going to benefit from them? There was a lot of learning that had to occur over a period of 3 or 4 years to where I really felt like I was, okay, now I finally got it. I know I'm delivering something that people value. They invite me back. They like me. They applaud.
Right, that's a good thing.
So I think we're finally hitting the sweet spot here. But man, it can be challenging. And then there's the whole other aspect of once you develop that, then how do I market it? How do people find out about me and all the things that go on that? And it's an entrepreneur's job is never done. It's just a journey. There's no big end point. You just learn as you go.
Right. There is no finish line. But so how was that kind of public speaking for you? Because I know I've had other guests on in the past, and that's always been one of the biggest things for them. They come through their athletic career and, they don't really think about it. And then they're in this room and they're talking in front of 150 people. And it's like, whoa, this is
it's hard. And even if you've done, like I did television for quite a while before that, and that's relatively easy to do in comparison to being on stage and being live and actually being expected to motivate and inspire people in a room of 200 people who have been there all day, locked up in the room, and may have just finished listening to 2 hours of the CEO discuss the financial report, and it's like, bam, now you're on. It was a transition, and it's just it's like starting over again with like, well, here's your skis and here's your poles, right. And there's a jump down there at the bottom, and there's about 75 bumps between there and and how am I going to get down that thing? And so and you just have to go and do it. And one of my friends down in Las Vegas, great speaker, he always says, speak more to speak more. And so I had to be willing to just go and speak wherever I could find. I spoke at the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club, the Chamber of Commerce, anybody that would have me. And when I first wrote my speech, I literally just read it to them because I hadn't memorized it yet.
Right.
And, but I told them ahead of time, I'm like, they weren't paying me anything. I was just coming in to show up. But I got a sense of, wow, they got good feedback. They said, wow, that's really a great message, and keep going with that. And that would inspire me enough to go back into work on it a little bit more and try to memorize a little bit more. And but it wasn't easy. I mean, there's no quick transition unless you've got a professional. If you've got a professional coach or somebody that writes speeches for presidents or something like that, that can whip you something out. But it still has to be your message. And I think a lot of speakers make the mistake of just trying to use some sort of canned stuff that you hear from a lot of speakers. And I think the uniqueness for me and many of my friends is taking the time to really find your stories and put them together in a way that is valuable for other people. And it's an art, but it can be done.
Yeah. Well, it really kind of, it speaks to your attitude. Everything that we've talked about, you really seem to just have this attitude of going out and doing it and being willing to kind of put in that work and fine tune and be able to put yourself out there, right? Like if you're going through and you're speaking to a group and you've never done public speaking, even if you are doing it for free, there would be so many people that would probably not even be willing to have the fear of like, oh, I got a piece of paper, I'm just going to read this paper. They probably wouldn't go out on stage, right?
And I was one of those guys. I'd throw some notes on a yellow legal pad and go out and talk to somebody. And looking now on it, I'm mortified that I did that because I must have sucked. But but again, I was willing to try it, and you just don't know. I had somebody local in Park City to help me with my first part of the presentation, and I started kind of doing it, and I was kind of like it, but I wasn't really sure. And it wasn't until I met this other coach who really helped me drill down a little bit further into what my truths were and was able to put that on paper. That's when it really started kind of hitting the sweet spot. And, but you just don't know. You have to go speak, and you got to fall on your face, and you got to say, record yourself, and they have to sit there and watch it and go, oh my God. Then that's just how you learn. It's like anything else. So first time I picked up a basketball, same thing. Like So that was a little rough out there. So, you know,
And is it that same process? I mean, when you came through and with the book, the 4 commitments of a winning team, is that the same process you kind of went through, or how'd you like, okay, how'd you come about the idea for the book?
well, many speakers use a book as their platform. As athletes, we have an advantage because we can just throw some highlights from the Olympics up there, right, or NBA highlights, and that at least will get you in the door. Um, and so I really put off doing a book for a long time. And my wife and I finally decided, like, we got to get this thing done. But it was hard. The same thing, trying to find somebody to kind of help us with the writing, and take the speech and kind of expand it and go deeper with it. And how do you do that? And how do you make it resonate? And so it was, it was kind of hit and miss trying to find somebody. And it took a long time. I quit writing it 2 or 3 times. Because I'm like, oh, this is never going to work. I'm never going to find the right person. These stories aren't coming together. This thing is just a big hodgepodge of stuff. And but over time, because I kept asking and kept going to stuff, and got a buddy who's a great author here in Salt Lake that I visited with, Richard Paul Evans, and he invited me to an author workshop, and he took a lot of the mystery out of the whole process, and it finally helped me get me refocused and down where I could get the thing over the finish line. And then, and we're very realistic about how we thought we were going to sell books and where we were going to sell books. And so we wrote the book from that perspective. Okay. Because we knew we weren't going to, we're not going to be an Amazon #1 bestseller or anything. I knew I was going to sell books to the people I speak to. And sure. So that was, those kind of lessons you just had to learn as you went. But the same thing, it was the perseverance. It's like, well, I never completely gave up on it. I put it aside for a few years, but it just kind of kept coming back around and coming back around. And finally the right people came in place, and it just all kind of just in very short order came together, and all of a sudden it was done. I was like, wow, we actually did that. We actually got it done. I didn't care if I sold 1. It was just the process of getting the thing done was just so remarkable, because it's quite an undertaking.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like it's quite the process for sure.
And it's not that big of a book. I'm like, I don't know how people do it that write, 500, 600, 700 page books. So.
Right. No, that willingness to go through and go through that process is so inspiring, though. Just to hear and it's one thing, like I said, was speaking to your attitude, just to open the doors and continue to try to have that kind of attitude of like, all right, it's not clicking right now. Let me try and see what's behind door number 70. Let's see what's in there. Maybe this is what it's going to take to kind of make it click and make it work for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So one more thing I wanted to ask, I was quite curious about, still a passion for cars? Any, because I know you were the auto mechanic. What kind of led you down into that?
My father was a diesel mechanic, worked primarily on boats, and I grew up in the LA harbor on Saturdays with him, working on old boats from the 30s and 40s and old diesel engines and things like that. And so I had a basic understanding of that kind of stuff. And when I finished high school, a friend of mine was going to trade school in Arizona, and I didn't know what to do next. And he's like, hey, come on, though. It's a 12-month program. They give you a government loan for the tuition, which I think was like $3,500 back then in 1975. And they helped you find an apartment. They helped you find a job. And so I'm like, yeah, all right, sounds reasonable. So we loaded up our old cars and drove to Phoenix. And I worked all night at a Jack in the Box restaurant and went to school during the day. And we lived in this little tiny studio apartment called the Glen Rosa Twilighter. And very cool. They had a giant marijuana leaf painted on the bottom of the pool. It was quite the place. And so it was all these guys living there that were going to trade school. It was a crazy time. But we got through that year, and, and I came back out with a certificate. I was a quote unquote certified mechanic, and got a job back in California at a Cadillac dealership, got fired within about 6 weeks. And I ended up at this tire store, doing tune-ups, brakes, front end, any of that kind of stuff. So it was just something I enjoyed doing. I didn't know if it was going to be my career. I didn't know where it was going to go, but it was
Sure.
like something to do in the meantime. And I felt like it was always a skill that I could always fall back on. And so I still have my toolbox in my barn if I need it.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, the first car I got was a 96 Ford Explorer with, I think, like 170,000 miles on it. And I mean, I absolutely loved that thing and did all the work. I learned how to work on that car: brakes,
Right.
rotors, water pump. And, I didn't have the money to take it into a mechanic shop. So I had the
Figure it out.
book. This was like pre-YouTube, because you had like the book to go through as YouTube was getting their videos.
Yep.
And then it became super easy. Like,
Yep.
oh, this is on
Chilton's
YouTube.
Auto Manual. Yeah.
Exactly. So I was just kind of curious, for sure. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I
Sure.
really appreciate it. And I look forward for people out there that where can they find out more?
My website's 7foot4.com, or you just Google me, Mark Eaton, or you can pull up my book on Amazon or Kindle or Audible, The 4 Commitments of a Winning Team.
Perfect. All right. Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, man. Good luck. All right.
Thanks. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And make sure you hit that little bell button so you get notified every time a new episode drops. Thanks.